Okay, so here's another episode of Skillz Pay Billz. Why we decided to create this little segment in our podcast is because we want to find out more about the different industries that we know, vaguely. We have a rough idea of what people do, but these are the industries that we actually want to find out more about. And for today's episode, we actually have one of our very own hosts, Vinod, aka Vin Decent. Thanks for being interviewed. Yeah. So let's get right into it lah. We understand that you're an editor. So can you maybe tell us what was the first time you ever thought this could be something you do, and why?
Oh yeah, okay. So I think my first, going back to right at the start, right? The first video I've ever edited was when I was about 13, 14 years old, and it was a clip of my friends skateboarding. So I used to film them skateboarding, and I was really bad at skateboarding, so I just decided to be the guy that films them instead of actually taking part in the skateboarding.
Were you filming on the skateboard?
Occasionally.
Don't you have to be on the skateboard to actually film?
more skills,
occasionally, but I always went I think it'd be better to get a static shot from below, so I didn't have to ride on the skateboard all the time. But
laziness lah.
And out of the complete lack of skill, I couldn't even do an ollie and stuff like that. So I was I volunteered to film, and it was I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I think my mom bought a iMac, the really old the old iMac, which had a swivel head and a dome base. Do you remember that? Remember the ad where the guy looked at it and then he kept yeah. So that came with iMovie, and that was the first time I started editing properly lah. I used to play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, so I used a lot of the.
Also, on PS2,
I love that game. Yeah, on PS1.
PS1. I was on PS2.
Yeah, and I just went to download some of the songs from Tony Hawk's and then put that on the skate video, and then I showed it to my friends, and I made it into a DVD and gave it to my friends, and they enjoyed it.
Do you still have those videos?
Yeah, I probably have it somewhere in my room.
Oh, we should feature
that was the first time.
You didn't post it on any I don't know, MySpace or Friendster at the time?
No, at the time, honestly, what we did was we just passed the DVD around, and then when we went to my friend's house for a stayover, we would just watch it, and that was it. We didn't post it on any. I don't think I was on any social media at that point. Also, maybe Friendster, but it wasn't big enough to host a video on it. So, yeah, that was my first edit experience.
Yeah, and
apart from that, I didn't really do much editing until after my O-levels, and I was trying to figure out where to go, whether I actually kind of like doing physics and chemistry, so I was thinking about engineering. But then I talked to my dad, and my dad was like, "Oh, you like to edit videos, right? I like to shoot and edit videos. Why not you try going down the media route?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I do enjoy doing that." And then that's how I chose to go
unlike parents.
Exactly. Yeah. It was quite refreshing, I guess. Where all my other classmates were talking about going to JC. Because I did pure science, right? And all my other classmates wanted to go to JC, and they were like, "Oh yeah, let's go to ACJC or this and that." And I was just like, "Oh, I want to go and study mass comm and poly," and everyone was looking at me weirdly and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't regret it. So I chose to go to poly and study media and comms.
Yeah.
And that's where I shot stuff more and edited stuff more, and and after NS. Went to uni, continued studying film, and came back to Singapore and applied for a job. Well, it was basically the first job I was offered, and it was to be an assistant editor at a production company, and that's how I started. That's how I got into the industry.
Did you continue any more of that? Because you said you started editing at all the skateboard videos and everything. How about in secondary school, in poly, in uni? Do you do anything? Do you continue doing the same things you did or you like to do?
Yeah, so I think I wasn't fully drawn into the editing itself. It was more of producing content It wasn't just editing. It was more like being a producer, being a writer. And in poly, it was when I discovered films and proper films and TV shows. Like, there was 1 year in poly where I spent the entire year watching like IMDb's top 250 movies. That was my challenge. That was my Jialat June challenge for 2008 or something like that.
Yeah, the OG. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wait,
so that's what I did.
Before you actually got formal training for it, right? How do you teach yourself how to edit?
I just opened iMovie, and then I just
wow.
I just started like putting videos in on top of music, and based on some skate videos that I used to watch.
Right. Okay.
Because in Tony Hawk's there was some skate videos of the different skateboarders. So I just used to watch that and I'd be like, oh, that's cool. Then I tried to like copy the same thing.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So it wasn't very well edited. It was
really
like,
just watch and learn, and then edit along the way.
those like star transitions and circle and
No, you know why I asked? Because there's this actually award-winning documentary called Minding the Gap. And it's by this director called Bing Liu. And then he did this skateboard documentary of his friends. And then became a multi-year thing. And then it came out in 2018 and he won some stuff. So it's like similar to your story where he just started filming his friends. Then suddenly he realized there was a bigger story about like poverty and all that in America. So then he decided to publish it in 2018 and then he won some stuff lah. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. I need to check that out because similar. That's how I started also.
Yeah, but it's very, very interesting. So when going back to your first job, what was the biggest culture shock for you lah? Like, because that was essentially your first job, right? And your were there any things that were different in the way you taught and applying it to real life?
Yes. There were major differences, I think. Studying film in uni and even in uni, we were taught to use Premiere Pro because they were predicting that the industry was moving towards that and away from Avid and stuff like that. So that's what we focused on in uni. But we were taught the basics, and I think that everything else has to be self-taught. We were just taught how to use what buttons to press to cut, to splice or whatever like that on your Premiere Pro, but then anything on top of that is where you have to learn yourself and go and research yourself. I mean, that's the big part of uni, right? It's going and researching all these, watching movies and trying to replicate certain scenes in your edits. So when I joined the production house in Singapore, I was aware of some of the content that they have made before because they are one of the biggest production houses in Singapore. I mean, I think they're the biggest independent production house in Asia. So I was aware of their content and I really liked some of their content that they made. They do a lot of stuff for Discovery Channel, Channel News Asia, Net Geo, and of course some short form work for online. But their main type of work was long form factual content for TV. So I like documentaries, and that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to join and work with them. And I think in terms of culture shock, the pace in which they were working was the thing that I was very amazed by, and it was immediately felt from the day I started working there. In terms of how fast they wanted stuff to be turned around, in terms of how much work was happening at the same time, how many projects were being juggled at the same time. Yeah, so that was the main culture shock that I got when I first entered the industry.
I think maybe for like listeners out there, like, could you give an breakdown on what an editor does? Because I think when people think about filmmaking and producing videos, they think about just someone holding a camera, and after that they don't really know much, and it suddenly appears on YouTube like magically. But in between there's this whole post-production process. So can you like elaborate on that? What do people usually do on post-production, and where does an editor come in that process?
Okay, I think first of all, I want to say that I've been in the industry for about 3.5 to 4 years. So these are just my views also. It's obviously
fledglings
different from person to person. I think being an editor is is one of the most important parts of, or rather, editing is one of the most important parts of the production process, right? Of the filmmaking process. That's where you take all the footage that's been shot and then you try to piece together your final product. So some shows you have months of footage that you have to go through. Some shows, you have like a few days of stuff to go through. So that's where you put the jigsaw together. And on top of that, not only the footage, you choose the music, you choose the sound effects, you decide the pace in which. I think pace is such a big thing in editing. You as an editor, you have to get the feel right and you have to get the pace right. On top of that, you still need to deal with the director and the director's vision of what the show is. So your communication with the director is very, very important, because if you are both on different wavelengths, then that's a recipe for disaster, because you need to understand the director's vision, and the director needs to respect your skill as an editor also. So it's a balance there.
So, okay, maybe you could also elaborate a bit on what the director does, or like what the producer does in a production company, because I think we can help our listeners understand like the full picture of the creative production process.
A director in a production company, or rather in TV we call them producers. So a producer would be the person that sees the project through from the beginning to the end. So if right from conceptualization, where they do their research, they come up with ideas, they find the people. For example, if it's a documentary, they find the subject to interview. They find the interviewees, they find the locations, then they talk to the production managers about organizing the crew and specific production needs. And then they go out and they shoot. Most of the time, the director gives the vision to the crew, and the crew will execute it for them. After they shoot, the director goes through the footage, logs the footage, and then gives it to the editor, and then sits with the editor and pieces the whole thing together with the editor. So some directors are really hands-on in the edit, and some just let the editor do their thing. But what I think it boils down to is how experienced the editors are, because I was more of a junior editor, so I think the directors that I worked with were more hands-on, and they were guiding me more, versus some of the senior editors in my company had more free reign with creativity. But that's also a thing where it comes with your years of experience under your belt, right? If you want to take a risk, you're more likely to be allowed to take that risk if you are a senior editor than if I suggest something as a junior editor.
I guess there's more trust in someone's experience.
Yeah, there definitely is. So it's something that you have to really build up, and you have to build up your street cred lah. You have to.
You should show them your skate videos.
Yeah, that's my actual legit street cred. So in the edit process, what the producer does is basically, because of how fast the turnarounds are for documentaries that we're working on, the producers normally just pick the lines that they want to use from the interviews or from the actuality that they've shot, and they give it to the editors, and the editor then puts these lines together and then chooses the visuals that complement these lines. So the editor is more the visual, the producer is more of like the content in terms of the dialogue and what the lines being said on camera.
Yeah, so going back to your
I was just wondering also, like you mentioned the creative process, and were there any like difference in like your expectations of your role as a editor versus your actual reality of it? Because I think if someone is trying to get into an editing job, they probably expect different things from what will actually happen in reality. And I think that applies a lot also for other jobs. So maybe for you, like, could you share like more of that expectation versus reality, like the things that you encountered?
I think that a lot of, if not all of us that are in the film and TV industry got drawn to it because of a certain romance, right? Of telling your story and making your own content and having your own creative direction. I mean, when I was in poly and even when I was in uni, like, I mean, more than half of us wanted to be directors. That was the case, but you know that that's not going to happen. You know, you need people who do sound, you need people to do editing, lighting, everything else. Also, production management is very important. So, like, there is always the desire to want to have your creativity expressed, and that was also one of my biggest desires, right? To have my creativity expressed. And I think for people just coming into the industry, that's going to be extremely hard. Like, especially if you're going to be working in a production house and you're going to be working for someone and working with other people, right? It's a constant back and forth with discussing an idea and discussing a direction. And especially when you're new, you can suggest ideas, but at the end of the day, you have to listen to people who are more senior and people who have more experience. Because, yeah, more often than not, they know better because they've worked in the industry. And there's a lot of things that you have coming out of university that you say, like, oh, I want to change this way of filmmaking. I want to change this style. I want to do it this way. I think those things may have to be put on hold for a while until you've established yourself a bit more. And then you can be more dominant in your creative expression, because in order to earn that level of credibility, you need to earn your stripes, basically. You need to go through the trenches first before you can fully have your own say.
You mentioned just now the fact that the turnaround time is very quick, and this somehow plays a factor in your editing process, and ultimately, this could affect your creative control of the final end product. Are there any other factors you would say, factors in Singapore especially, they are very limiting, or are there any boundaries to that affect your creative control over a product?
Working in a production company, you're working in a collaboration with a client also. So inevitably you will have comments from the clients, and the clients will always have comments regardless of how good your cut is, your rough cut is. The clients will have to have their say because they're paying for the show, and that's understandable. So that is a big part of the process also, because even if you're on the same page as your director and your team, you can send it to the client, and the client can be completely not with you guys and suggest major changes that all of you disagree with, but because they're the client, you just have to, put your head down and do it. If you're doing stuff for online, short form stuff for government agencies and things like that, there's also a lot of different rules that you have to adhere to, and be very, very careful with the type of content you're putting out, because it has to align with their message also. Because if
OB
let's say
markers, do they call it that?
Sorry?
Do they call it OB markers?
No. What's OB markers?
Okay. Like sort of their boundaries that you cannot cross.
I guess it's that. Yes, it's basically, if let's say we are doing a video portion of a campaign, basically, and this is the video for this campaign, we have to make sure that what we put in the video is aligned to everything else in the campaign, and it's not drifting off somewhere else. So that is something that we have to keep, because we are only doing the video portion and the campaign is being done by the agency. So there's a lot of communication with the agency that we have to make sure that we are having constantly, so that we are on the same page. Because there were numerous experiences where we think we're doing one thing and all of us think the same thing, and then the agency comes back and says, like, no, this is like completely not what we were expecting. And then, so I think the communication is very important also, to keep letting your client know what you're doing in the process.
Because I remember you said that pacing is so important, right? Why does pacing matter in the ultimate, project? So
when you watch content, right, I think this is something that is subconscious, and I think if you're not really aware of the editing, I think that's also a sign that it's edited well, right? Because you're so engaged with the content that you're not thinking about the external things. But of course, if as an editor, like, especially once I started editing more, I was forcing myself to pay attention to the editing when I was watching content also, because I need to learn from the best, right? If I'm watching something on Netflix, I want to know, like, why this scene is so engaging and why this scene made me feel so excited, or how they build the suspense in this scene through the use of cuts. and music. And that is literally 90 to 95% editing. Yes, the shots can be nice, but you can have a nice shot and it can be really boring if it's not cut in a pacey manner. When it's not cut, there's some slow scenes and there's some fast scenes. The reason it becomes a fast scene is because the cuts are way faster. You can have a steady shot of someone running, and if it's one shot of someone running, it's still going to be a slow scene. If it's 20 shots of someone running, it's going to make you feel like you're in there running with that person also.
Yeah.
And of course, then you add your music, your pacey music, all of these things, and your sound effects also play a part in creating that image or creating that feeling in the audience. Editing is such a powerful tool in that sense because it's so important in every video content that is made. Editing is key. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think like for editing, it's not something usually people think about when they think of like video production? Like usually people think of the director, they think about the actors, but usually for editors, they're not really in the spotlight. Like you see like at all the movie awards, like Academy Awards, the Oscars, like there's always like a best director, but not really a best editor. Or even if there is, no one really like remembers who that is. Like what
There is a best editor.
But no one knows who.
but no one
Yeah, why do you think that is?
The directors get most credit for most of the work. So even the cinematographers are not as well known as the directors, because the directors are seen as the leader and the visionary, right? The guy who sets the whole tone. But as much as the director does that, the director relies on people like a very good cinematographer, editor, sound mixer. All these people have their own direction that they want to take it also, and having to understand what the director is saying and then translate that into, because the editors are the ones that actually do it, right? The cinematographers are actually the ones that do it. So the director is speaking and articulating his ideas, but to convert that into what you see on screen, that's a skill. That's like a really tough skill to learn, and it takes years and years to fully understand what people are saying, because that's something that I also struggle with. Like, how do I understand what the director is telling me when it seems like he or she is saying something very broad, and like, how do I convert that into something that appears on screen and is tangible? I do think that that these people are overlooked by society, but if you're in the media industry and you know the process that they have to go through, then you have a lot more respect for them.
Who are your heroes and why? Editors. Maybe you can tell us like the best edited movies that you think.
I don't have any specific editors in mind, but I have movies that I really enjoyed editing on. And this was actually a movie that I watched in university while I was learning about editing. It's called Koyani Skatsi. It's a documentary. It's by Godfrey Reggio. There's no narrative to the movie at all. It's just totally, there's no narration. It's just shots after shot after shot. And it's just made, the point of the story is made through juxtaposition of shots. So for example, they will have a shot of chicks in a factory, chicks going down a factory line, and that is juxtaposed with a shot of people going down an escalator. Of like a time lapse of people going down an escalator. So it's a visual poem in a sense. It's an hour and a half long. And yeah, it's a bit like hipster, because it's just like, oh, what is this? It's so random, it's so edgy, so out there. But that is entirely driven by editing, because the editors are just picking the shots of, it's shot all around the US. Editors are just choosing the shot from here, from a factory, and choosing a shot from people going down an escalator and putting it together. And then it's the editor saying that we have just become basically like factory workers, like, going down the assembly line. It's full of stuff like that. That was one of the films that really struck me when I realized how powerful editing is. I mean, the more mainstream stuff is like BBC's Planet Earth. Editing natural history stuff is a skill also, because even in my company, that when I was working there, we were doing natural history stuff with David Attenborough. So, and like watching the editors edit that stuff, like the senior editor edit it, right? I found like there's a newfound respect to how you edit stuff like that, because everything is you're creating the story. You know, when you shoot natural history stuff, right?
Yeah.
The story is written after you shoot. So you're shooting animals in the wild, and then you do the person shooting is also like doing research on these animals, right? And then you say that you know that these certain animals behave in this certain way, and then you craft your story based on the shots that you get, because you don't know what shots you're gonna get. So for example, if you watch Planet Earth, you know that it's full of stories. Each animal has their own story, have their own journey that they're going through.
Right.
And this is all written after that. But then the editor has to piece together this journey through choosing the shots that he has from this animal. So it's like, it's an art, I think. It's really amazing to see how, I think watching BBC Planet Earth is like on another level when you're as a filmmaker or like an editor. Anyone who has been in the industry would have to respect that, and then when you read about the number of years they take to make films like that, a series like that, then you understand. I think it's like 5+ years to make it. The hours that goes into it is crazy.
And like it really always amazes me like how they kind of crafted a story for these like animals, and the kind of patience and the dedication you need to get those shots. Every time I watch something like a natural natural what do you say, natural history kind of show, like the Planet Earth, it's so like I'm always amazed like how do they get this shot like of someone like a predator catching a prey, or like these kind of epic dramatic shots where if you were there in person you may even miss it. I guess for an editor, like crafting all that, picking all that together is also really, really cool to actually know that you are the one crafting the story, or you have a very big part in crafting a story.
It's something that is definitely overlooked, the amount of time that goes into these things. Like when I see the people working through the weekends and like ridiculous hours just to get a scene out. Yeah, I mean, and then obviously that scene is like a minute scene on screen. But you go have all these hours that you put into it.
And we're going to take a short break. That's all for part 1. For part 2, Vin is going to talk about how he goes to the extreme ends of the earth for his job, such as living in the wild in Kazakhstan. So please tune in for that. Thank you. Thanks everyone.